Hi everyone, welcome to the Hands-on CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Alicia Perez. Alicia's had quite a unique journey into cybersecurity. When she started in the field, she managed customer information security at LinkedIn and has since moved into compliance and third-party risk management. Alicia, it's great to have you here today, and I really would like you to tell us how you got started in the field because you came from something quite different, and I think this your origin story in cybersecurity is really interesting. So go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Addie, for having me here. I'm really excited to be here with you today and share a little bit about my experience. As you mentioned, I didn't come from a traditional security background. I actually had experience in sales support, customer service. And so when I started at LinkedIn, I was part of their order management team. I supported some of our top sales reps with essentially white glove service to our customers, any pre and post sales support. And I did that for a few years. And what ended up happening was our a director had been reached out to by the information security team. LinkedIn had acquired lynda.com, which is a learning platform. And we also had LinkedIn Learning. And so with that, we had more and more customers starting to come to us wanting to know how we kept their data safe. And so the security team was a bit smaller at the time there, and so our security team was busy doing security work and keeping the platform safe. And so they needed someone who would feel comfortable talking to customers and working with the sales reps and helping kind of build out that program. And thankfully, I was one of the few people on our team that my director had thought of. And so when I first saw his email, I was like, security, I don't know anything about data security. And, but I went home that night and I thought about it and I said, well, it's a really interesting space. It's always changing. There's always something new to learn. I was kind of ready to make a change and I didn't really know what that was. Um, but I wanted to feel more challenged. And then also, just from a financial perspective, I was like, well, this would be a better opportunity, moving from customer sales support over into security and engineering as I had a growing family. And I also kind of, think of risk management as well. It's a risk worth taking. And I kind of figured if it didn't work out so well, then I could potentially come back to my old team. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm willing to learn more about this new position and I'd love to meet with the team and talk about it. And yeah, thankfully it ended up working out. I joined the security team and was able to just kind of learn the ropes. There were a lot of great people on the team that mentored me. Yeah, so I was able to take my skills of being able to talk with customers, feeling comfortable, and being able to translate our security controls into digestible information for our customers and for our sales team. And within a few months, we had new folks join us, and we started and we formed the first customer trust team at LinkedIn, which ended up growing into a global team, supporting, responding to anything from customer questionnaires, getting on phone calls with customers, negotiating security terms and customer contracts, discussing privacy. So it was a really great experience.
Wow, it sounds like you really you took the experience you had, which was mainly it seems in communicating with the customers, and then slowly sprinkled in the security, and then went deeper in there. If I read it
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah. I was definitely scared at first and very intimidated. When I joined the team, people were using all of these different terms that I had no idea what they meant. So, I'm listening and people are telling me things and I'm like, I do not understand a word you're saying. But, you just have to you have to have an open mind and be willing to learn and put in the work. And like I said, there were a lot of people who were willing to teach me, and I'm super grateful for that.
Amazing. And then even after you left LinkedIn, you stayed in that course of doing security, but even advanced to other sectors in it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So in my next role, I joined a company that was founded by former LinkedIn employees, and that security team was growing. And when I initially joined, I came on board again to help create or to help build out their customer trust program. And I was also given the opportunity to partner with the GRC team and start to learn third party risk management, which, is essentially the opposite side of the coin. So in the customer trust space, everybody wants to know, how are you protecting my data? Who has access to it? What information do you need? And then on the third party side, I'm now the person asking, our
Checking.
vendors, our suppliers, those types of questions. And then, helping to educate our employees on, how to work with the right vendors and things to look out for.
Interesting.
Yes.
So it seems like the experience you had in knowing how to answer the questions probably gave you the ability to ask very good questions also.
Yes, I think so. I'd like to think so.
Interesting. And do you, like, if you look at your day to day now versus back then, what, how does it look like? What's different?
Um, sure. So I think just from my experience, my focus is a little bit different. When I first started, it was very much a learning process for me, learning how to translate technical information, being able to understanding our own security controls and how to best discuss them with our customers or internal stakeholders. And I still do those things, but I'm also focused on like scaling operations as well. As a company, thinking of third party risk as your company begins to grow and you're starting to include more and more vendors. How do we best capture that information? How do we make that process easy for our internal stakeholders? How do we make sure we're getting the right information? How are we tracking, monitoring? So, yeah, thinking about process and program improvements as well that can lead to better risk management.
Do you feel like you're still learning a lot as you go, or is it, or was it a lot of learning in the beginning and now it's more maintaining of sorts?
Um, I feel like I'm always learning. Things can change so quickly. Um, and so you just have to really stay on top of things. So constantly reading articles, learning from my peers, attending conferences, and just sometimes another perspective, helps you to, maybe there was something that you were missing or just hadn't thought about, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I feel like I'm always learning something new and just trying to stay on top of things. I feel like you have to constantly just keep on top of your skills and being able to stay relevant. Just technology is constantly changing, so you need to be aware.
How do you recommend people stay updated? Because there's so many, different sources of places to learn things and to, you need to like really understand what is the important things because otherwise you're just going to be learning all day long and not implementing. So how do you do that?
That is true. Um, So, I think there's things you want to learn just for your own benefit, and then also that are relevant to your area of, you know, expertise, or where you're trying to, you got to think about your career goals as well, because there's so many different aspects of security. So thinking about learning, I kind of try to break it up into a couple of things. What's going to help me in my day to day and what I'm focused on, and then where do I want to potentially develop skills. And not really knowing much about third party risk management at first, I looked into, okay, what can I learn off of? You have some LinkedIn learning videos. And then I reached out to my former colleagues who I worked with who were in that space and said, hey, can you tell me about kind of what does your day to day look like? How do you assess vendors? What are the things that you're looking for? Any tips? So utilizing my network, learning from people who have that experience, online learning like LinkedIn Learning or, YouTube, and then industry recognized conferences, webinars, just, it doesn't have to be studying for an exam all the time, but just getting bits of information here and there. There's a lot of great articles learning about different data breaches and kind of how did it happen. Can even give you things of, oh, okay, these are some of the things that I need to be aware of, or what can I implement on my side to, help prevent some of these things from happening. And then, I think I had touched on AI earlier. That's a growing area. And so just learning as much as I can, because that's going to start is in my day to day with all these new vendors that folks want to bring on, and everything has an AI component. So I need to stay on top of things and learning, um, transparency. What are the things that people are concerned about? How do we make sure security is in that cycle process? How do we make sure we're using tools that are, ethical, things along those lines? And how do we reduce that risk? I think I got off on a tangent there, but
No, I think it's interesting. How do you see AI as of now? Because I mean, obviously, it's not like it started now. Now it's just it
yeah.
became very popular.
Yeah.
So, how do you see it?
I think there's, like everything, there's pros and cons, and it's not going anywhere. So I think we just need to think about our approach and learning about AI. As I mentioned, including security in the life cycle of the development of AI processes, and just responsible AI, thinking about the legal implications, privacy. How do you reduce bias? So I think it's more about, embracing change. It's not going anywhere. So how can we make it secure? How can we make it better? How can we make sure we're asking the right questions when we're evaluating tools, and just using it responsibly?
Interesting. Is it something, as someone who works a lot with third parties, it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. But for example, when I was at, I forgot the name of the conference in London, um, InfoSec in London last year, a lot of the vendors, most of the vendors, are very much AI, 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 and it's not always so clear in what way AI, or like, how do you view that? Like the positive side of like people who are trying to use it, is it something that is mandatory in your opinion, or is it like, what do you think?
Um, I think we all want to find things that are going to make our lives easier, or improve processes, or how can we reduce some of this manual work or guesswork. And I think there's definitely times where it is valuable. But again, it comes back to that, are we using it responsibly? What is the intended outcome? What's happening to, that data? Education, are we following the right legal and regulatory processes? Are we respecting privacy, rights to privacy. Yeah, I think it just comes back. It comes down to how is it used, who has access to information. Is it being used for good?
Like any power.
Yeah.
um,
And I think, again, like educating people on the right use, I think this comes up a lot is, chat GTP. You need help summarizing a document or writing something, but people aren't necessarily thinking about the data that, sometimes they're using private company data and they're like, oh, great, now I've got this amazing, Word doc that I can share in for this executive summary. But then you just put all of this private, confidential information into, you unintentionally shared it somewhere.
yeah, that's fun. Have you ever witnessed a mild to severe security incident?
Um, Well, I mean, I think just like the big public ones, not any, not anything at one of my companies that I can discuss. But I would also say I'm not in like the incident responder. I think, anytime there is an incident, I would be I haven't had to deal with anything where I've had to go to a customer and say, hey, we did this wrong. Your data has been exposed, or this has been a breach of your confidence. I've only dealt with having to respond to questions about were you impacted by a security. So, like, for example, solar winds. When that happened, everybody's asking, hey, were you impacted? What's happening? Is my data safe? Is this? And so in the customer trust space, my role is to um, essentially work with our team to get a public facing statement and what can we share that's been approved by security and by legal. I don't get to be in the behind the scenes of what actually happened, how something was found, um, that type of thing. And then on the third party side, then it's just me going and asking our vendor, like, hey, were you impacted? How is our data impacted? Do we have to disclose anything to and then taking that information back to our team to figure out if there's anything that we would need to then share or fix or whatever that might be.
Interesting. How concerned are you with third parties of your third parties? Like, are you?
Um, Yes, I mean, yeah, you try to get that sub processor information, but it's also like a rabbit hole, because then that company has their sub processors who have their sub processors, and it's like um, at what point do you draw the line? And you can't necessarily hold your vendors sub processors to a certain level of accountability. You have to have that trust and that, I guess, risk acceptance, based on your evaluation of the vendor that you're working with, that they have good processes in place to then in return make good decisions about the vendors they're working with.
If I go like on a bit of a different topic, we were talking before about culture, like
Mhm,
within the company.
mhm.
How do you create a culture where people don't automatically go to ChatGPT?
I don't know if we could necessarily create a culture where they don't go to Chat GPT. But I guess do you have any internally built tools that function similarly, or any recommendations for approved tools that provide a similar function? And then I think just education, policy, making sure people are aware of, hey, make sure you're not putting, confidential information into this tool. Here's the risk. Here's why it matters, because people are more likely to care when they understand the why and the impact. Here's why you should care about, this thing. Here's what the risks are. So I think putting guardrails in place. I think there's sometimes security can be seen as a blocker. Oh, they're just trying to prevent me from doing this or that. Where it's more, you have a business to run, and your customers need to make sure their information is safe. You have to make sure you're not putting the company at risk as well. So having a good understanding, promoting that culture, or saying, we're here to help, not block, and this is why this is important, and offering other options or solutions, or that education versus just saying, hey, no, don't do this.
What do you think people have a hard time understanding? People who aren't from the security field, but more, like employees of the company that
I
don't
think
necessarily.
I would say maybe sometimes just not understanding the risks or complexities of security, or, how easy it is to exploit yourself to a vulnerability, or how the information can be used. If I go back to my days of where I was naive to security, I'm like, oh, okay, somebody, hacked my email, big deal. It's like me emailing my mom, or you know what I mean? Like, I don't have anything crazy in there, but there is personal information in there. Or what if somebody pretends to be me and scams somebody out of money, or you know, uh, infects me with the virus, or there's just all these different things. Now they have, I don't know, my birthday or whatever information, all of my contacts, and you sometimes you just don't think it's that big of a deal, but there's so much that can be done with your information. Or just thinking about, I'll date myself a little bit here, when I was younger and using like Napster, and, you're downloading music and just whatever off the internet, and meanwhile you're infecting your computer with, viruses, malware, and not even giving two thoughts about
That's fun. Interesting. So you say education and like talking to people, but what does education actually look like? Because I'm assuming most of these people are not waiting to listen to security talks, Like, how do
it.
you actually get people to come to you if they see something suspicious and not just go, okay.
um, I think you have to make people feel comfortable to talk to you, you know, um, because no one wants to feel like, oh, if I make a mistake, or if I want to do this, they're going to tell me no, or I'm going to get in trouble. Or so you have to be able to have those like open lines of communication, be available to answer and ask questions. And then I think also, just starting from like the new hire phase, in the onboarding, there's a section where we talk about, somebody comes in and shares about security, like, here's our acceptable use policy, here's things we want to look out for, here's things to think about with, you know phishing, or hey, like, make sure you're not downloading like random apps, here's a list of things we already have approved. If you see something that, you know um, you there might already be something approved that meets your use case, or if not, hey, come to IT, we'll review it with you, we're going to, or IT security, we're going to review it with you, we're going to ask some questions, we want to understand, the use case, and then we'll either approve it, or we'll say, no, but here's why, or here's what we think you can do, instead. So having that initial, kind of discussion question phase in the new hire process of onboarding, you have your acceptable use policy, you have your information security policy that's available, for everyone. We've got like FAQs, of course, there's annual security and awareness training. And then I think it also has to come top down as well, like working with your business partners and helping them to understand the importance of security as well, because then that starts to translate down to their teams, and having that buy-in from others as well helps to promote that culture, across the board. And then I think, we have different, there's always cybersecurity awareness month, or, when you have company all hands are important meetings, making sure the security team is seen and heard from, and knowing that people have us available to reach out to, with questions. And I think at the end of the day, people really do want to do the right thing and make sure they're going about things in the appropriate way. So just having that open communication, I think, really really helps, and knowing that the team is there to help you and not block you. And so I think that helps promote that culture and awareness. um, I would also say, um, and maybe this is a shift, or maybe just something I've realized from, my experience in security, is there's also no deal if you don't have secure practices. So security is becoming increasingly important to your customers. There's, different breaches happening every day. They are only going to want to work with you if they feel like they can trust you, if you're transparent about your security practices and compliance practices, if they know how their data is being used, if they know who has access to it, if they feel like you have the right controls. Vendor review, third party risk management is pretty much part of, you know, everybody's process these days. It's in the sales cycle. So if you don't get that security sign off, then you're not going to get that sale. And so, it's also a business need as well. Your company's not going to survive if you don't have good security practices in place. It impacts your bottom line and ability to bring in revenue.
Do you think, as like you're the face of third parties, so I'll ask from that perspective, when you need to decide if you're going to start using a certain vendor,
Mhm.
and obviously there's some risk to starting to work with anyone,
Yeah.
um, how do you make that decision of this is sort of a must to enable the business versus I don't know if we need this, and deciding not to take the risk? Like, what would be what are you looking at really?
Um, that's a really great question. I fortunately haven't had to work with too many vendors where we've had to turn them down. But I would say in the cases where we have, it was more of a fact that they I would say there are newer companies that had immature security practices. Not necessarily that, they had bad practices, but it was just that they needed to mature further. They didn't have maybe necessarily a dedicated security team or the right access controls in place, review cycles. They hadn't met, basic industry standard security and compliance controls yet. I think some people think of these as like checkbox, but like if you don't have SOC 2 report should be standard at this point. If you don't have that in place, like why not? So it's not necessarily we don't want to work with you. It's like, hey, we actually maybe do like your service and think, but we also can't put ourselves and our customers at risk, and we can reconsider you when you have these controls in place, or when you've matured a little bit. Or, they can say, hey, we're working towards this, and here's our mitigating controls that are in place. Here's what's on our roadmap. We can contractually agree to you that we'll have, XYZ in place by this time. So that transparency, understanding the controls. Is it a deal breaker? Is it not? Is it something we can work together on? And occasionally there are times where maybe we just don't necessarily feel comfortable, but the business is like, hey, we really need this. Then you have to go through an escalation process where you're documenting, here's the risks, here's our feedback, here's what we think needs to be course corrected. We're not comfortable signing off, and then have taking it to that next level of person who's going to take accountability on behalf of the business to sign off and accept that risk, and then continue to monitor to make sure those controls or whatever it is end up getting put into place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. You're saying that at the end of the day, if the business really needs a certain service vendor, then all security can do is make everyone aware of what the decision entails, like what is the risk, and then
Yeah.
whoever
And
is in charge makes that decision.
yeah. And thinking, clearly documenting, here's the risks that we see. Here's what we think we can do to potentially mitigate. Here's our recommendations to that vendor, and then to, the business owner. Um, yeah.
Do you think that as a whole, as it's obviously we can't answer for all companies, but do you think the sense in companies is wanting to work with more secure third parties or wanting to build a lot of things in house? Because I've heard a lot of different opinions.
Um, I think I think when you're in maybe the smaller stages, it's let's build something internally. But I think as you continue to expand and grow, and people, grow in their own careers, it becomes a question of, is it sustainable? And who's going to continue the iterations and improvements on that internally built tool? Is it going to continue to scale? Is it worth it to maintain versus buying an off the shelf tool that's managed by the third party? So I think it kind of, one, it depends on what it is, and then it depends on if you're able to scale and maintain that. So not necessarily like the best example, but when I joined Confluent, we, of course, have our website, and we had a trust and security page where our customers could come and download our SOC 2 report, our ISO certification, and other security related documents. And it was self serve, but it was internally maintained. And so when a customer would come, they would have to sign an NDA per document they wanted to download. So if they wanted 10 documents, they had to go through the NDA process 10 times. And if they were doing an annual review, they had to go through it every year. And the person who created and developed like that automation of the page, obviously he got promoted and wanted to work on other things. And so we would have to reach out to him, and we couldn't really do new iterations and improvements because he had other important work that he was focused on. So then it started being, one, not scalable, and started being more manual work for my team because customers were like, I'm not doing this. This is too much work. So then we're having to manually look up NDAs, send out emails, attach all these, which is not hard, but it's time, it's time consuming, and there's better uses of your time than sending out emails, right? Um, and then it slows down the due diligence process for customers that are trying to get through their sales cycle. So we eventually started working with the vendor that provided, and you know they maintain a trust site where we can go and upload our documents. It has a whole click through NDA process and really streamlined that for our customers because it became a better user experience. It was easier to manage and it's maintained by the vendor. So um, it just, you got to find where it makes sense.
So you're saying find the places where it makes a difference. Like in, for
Yeah.
example, this.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Is it more work than it's worth?
Yeah. Do you see security as a more business or tech kind of field?
Oh. I guess it depends on what you're doing in security. I think when I think of customer trust and GRC, it's enabling the business, protecting the business, putting the right policies, processes in place, protecting our customers, all of these things that help, again, as I said, drive revenue and get our customers to trust us, reduce the risk, help us to be able to sustain. And then you have, your security architects, your incident responders, your analysts that are focused on building things, on keeping the platform safe, on putting the right detection processes in place. So I think it kind of just depends on where you are within the org.
What would you define yourself? You'd be more in the business side, I would assume.
I think so. Yeah.
Interesting. A lot of times I ask, like, how do you balance between, um, like, the more techie side and the more business side? But it seems like in bigger organizations, usually there's just different people for these
Yeah.
different things.
Yeah. I mean, and at the end of the day, we're all about the business, and because you have to have a secure platform or whatever it is that, your company does, you have to have the right security controls in place if you want to have a successful business, if you want to drive sales, if you want to get customers. So everything we do impacts the business. Um, and it comes down to like that buy-in. So you have the one side who's able to translate that technical piece to the customers, to your internal stakeholders, and then you have the other folks who are actually doing the work to keep the platform safe. And you have to keep things simple for employees, make sure they can access the tools they need to be successful, but thinking about, do I have the right access controls in place, like least privilege information? Are we following best industry practices, promoting that security and awareness culture? So you have the technical folks who are keeping things safe, and then you have your other folks who are spreading that awareness and helping folks to understand the why behind what you're doing and how it benefits them, the company, and their customers.
Amazing. What do you think? What's the direction it's going? Like, if you look at the cybersecurity where it's been 10 years ago, 5 years ago, now, like, how do you see what changes will there be, in your opinion?
Um, I think this is a little bit of a challenging question for me just because, again, I don't have, that's not where my background necessarily is. Um, so just from like the role that I've been in, I would say just again, that transparency that customers want, wanting more
Can I
information.
actually can I actually reword? I'll edit that out and actually ask a question that I think is much more relevant,
Okay.
and I am sure you'll have a real actually an interesting answer. Okay, so how do you think um, relationships between vendors and companies are gonna progress in the future? Like, what is becoming increasingly important when you're talking to someone who you want to use their product, their service? Like, what is gonna be different or better in the future than it is now, in your opinion?
Um, I think transparency, being very upfront about um, your security controls, the compliance, having information readily available for your customers to be able to do as much of that self serve due diligence. They shouldn't have to go searching for, you know, it shouldn't be like pulling teeth to get information and learn about a company's security practices. Having a high level of transparency, documentation available, um, communication, if if you have questions, their willingness to be able to answer those questions, to get on a call to talk through any concerns. You'll notice a lot more companies have trust sites where you can go and see, okay, they're SOC 2 certified, they're ISO certified. They have business continuity information. They have, meet these different regulatory requirements. So putting that out there and being transparent, I think helps to build that trust and help you to be more proactive, and being able to review, understand, and select your vendors. I think when you're willing to give that information and be open and honest, then that helps build that trust.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm down to my last question. Actually, I
Okay.
thought if I had maybe two, but no, I'll make it one. Um, what made you decide? Because at the end of the day, you kind of, accidentally got into security, but then you made an active choice of, okay, like I want to continue in this path. Like, what is it about security that made you feel, wow, this is a direction I want to keep going?
I just think there's well, I guess this would apply to any job, but I just feel like there's always something new to learn. There's so many different aspects of security. Um, so you don't necessarily have to. So I've been doing the customer trust for the last, 7+ years, but now I'm like, okay, I'm really interested in security policy. I'm talking about all of these different things to our customers, but how do they really work? How do we, create a security policy? How do we communicate that internally? How do we identify risks? How do we evaluate? So being able to pivot and learn other aspects of security, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for growth and for learning and to see where else you can, fit in. Like incident response also is really interesting
Stressful.
to me. Yes, definitely stressful. Um, but you can, take, I think, different skills that you have and figure out how to apply it and learn to other areas. So there's always a different challenge. There's always something new that you can learn. You don't necessarily, I don't have to just stay in the customer trust space. I can learn about different areas of GRC and risk management and learn from others and take my skills there and continue to like build and scale programs. So yeah, it's super interesting. There's amazing people to learn from. There's new problems and challenges that you get to solve. So it's just a really interesting space.
So you recommend?
I definitely. I I'm very passionate about bringing folks from non-traditional backgrounds into security, bringing women into security, and trying to especially bringing more women into security.
That's the thing. I think I've
Yeah.
done like 40 episodes at this point, and maybe three women. So
Yeah. So when I started on the security team at LinkedIn, my first day we had like an all hands, and I went into the meeting room and I sat down and I looked around and I counted. Yeah, I counted, and we did have people in remote locations and stuff too, but not very many. I counted, I think, 27 men in the room and three women, and then two that were remote. I was like, okay. I mean, and thankfully, all the guys on the team, I never felt like I didn't belong. I never felt unwelcome. Everyone was great, but I was just like, okay, we definitely need some feminine energy on this team.
interesting. Yeah, I think 3 to 27 sounds like, the normal ratio in cybersecurity.
Yeah, which I found interesting because across the entire engineering org, it was like a
Mhm.
49, 51%
Really
split, which I think is great. But then just with the security team, it was like very disproportioned.
interesting. I think
Yeah.
we're going beyond the podcast. I think it's like there's something about security that kind of says like stress that women are don't like, and more it's easier to think about coding than it is about keeping a company secure. Do you resonate with that?
Uh, Possibly. I mean, as I think in like on the side that I'm on, I'm able to like disconnect a little bit more. But when I think about like the security architects, the incident responders, the SOC analyst, they're always on. And as a working mom, like I think it would be hard to disconnect and prioritize and um, so for me, I'm like glad I'm in the space that I'm in because I'm getting to do interesting and challenging work, and but I'm not necessarily having to be, online at all hours of the day, like protecting the platform.
Yeah. I think it's a perfect balance of doing security but not the actual security.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I think this is a perfect ending. It was really, really great having you, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was such a fun experience. So I'm glad we got to connect.